that we can, I think that we can begin. Yes, okay, great. So, good day, esteemed presenters and all guests. Thank you so much for joining us today. Climate Analytics Caribbean, Climate Tracker, and the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, CANARI, welcome you to the SIDS4 Media webinar. I'm Bianca Beddoe, Communications Lead for Climate Analytics Caribbean. So just a bit about Climate Analytics Caribbean. We are based in Trinidad and Tobago, and we aim to significantly augment the scientifically informed, knowledge-based resources which small island developing states, SIDS, and least developed countries, LDCs, in the region require to effectively counter the effects of climate change and create a climate-safe, sustainable, and just future for all. We are very, very pleased to collaborate with our exceptional partners for the session today, and we are so excited to have you all for what I know will be an extremely enlightening, empowering event. My co-MC for today is Mr. Hipolito Novelo, and he also has a few words of welcome. Hipolito, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Bianca. Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Hipolito Novelo. I'm a Caribbean journalist and mentor for Climate Tracker. I am happy and grateful that you're all joining us this morning ahead of SIDS4. You know, one of the reasons why Climate Tracker exists is to empower journalists like the participants here today. And we do so through various means, including webinars like the one we are participating in. The purpose of this session is to provide an overview of SIDS4 and to share insights of our significant developments. We have fantastic speakers lined up for you today who will share valuable information on the most efficient way how to cover SIDS4 and the most effective way how to be the voice of the voiceless and the best way to identify and highlight an issue and relay that issue to your readers, viewers, and listeners in the best possible way. I think this particular conversation will be very much appreciated. And if you have any questions during the presentation, jot them down on a notepad. We'll take them during the Q&A session after the final speaker. So with that, let's meet our esteemed speakers. Back to you, Bianca.
Thanks so much, Hipolito. So we know that the 4th International Conference on Small Island Developing States is less than a week away, and it has the potential to be a game changer for the Caribbean. The outcome will set up a 10-year action plan for all small island developing states to chart achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So as Hipolito said, we are so fortunate to have a great panel for you today. They will delve into the critical issues of the conference, and importantly, they will guide us on the most compelling, impactful coverage that we can generate from this conference. So to commence, we have the incomparable Ms. Rueanna Haynes, Director of Climate Analytics Caribbean. Rueanna is a climate law and governance specialist with extensive experience in the global climate change negotiations process under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. Rueanna also works to support the Alliance of Small Island States and climate change negotiations through strategy and technical advice, as well as capacity building. So today, Rueanna will expound on the significance of the SIDS4 conference and share important insights on the SIDS4 draft political document. Rueanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Bianca, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. I have about 10 minutes to do quite a lot, and I will try to be as efficient as possible because I am really interested in what my fellow speakers have to say about this conference. So I want to touch on 4 areas. The first is a little bit of background on the SIDS Sustainable Development process. We are at the 4th International Conference. There have been conferences before. We'll have a look at those and talk a little bit about what was done in those meetings. Then I want to look at interlinkages with the Global Sustainable Development Agenda. There's a lot of, I would say, yeah, there's a lot of synergies between SIDS Sustainable Development and the SDG agenda. The last SIDS conference was actually ongoing while we were negotiating the SDGs in the UN context. Then we're going to look at some of the interlinkages between climate change and sustainable development and some highlights from the Antigua and Barbuda action plan for SIDS, which is the name of the outcome document that has been agreed but not yet endorsed. for this conference. So a bit of a background on sustainable development as a term. We have the first definition coming forward from the Brundtland Report in 1987, setting out that sustainable development meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This definition was taken forward in the context of the first UN Conference on Environment and Development that happened in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, where sustainable development was declared as an essential objective of the international community. At that conference, we have an agreement on Agenda 21 that included 27 principles. I want to highlight to you here Principle 6 that recognized that the special situation and needs of developing countries, particularly the least developed and those most environmentally vulnerable, shall be given special priority. And this is where we have the beginning of what we would call the making the case for the special situation of SIDS and special treatment of SIDS within the international community that started in the sustainable development context, but then is also applied very much in the climate change context, in the context of climate change negotiations. So in terms of background, we've had 3 SIDS conferences, the first in 1994 in Barbados that set out the Barbados Program of Action. And this program of action really established the key parameters for a SIDS sustainable development agenda that would be taken forward by SIDS, but with the support of the international community. It set out that SIDS are particularly vulnerable to natural as well as environmental disasters, but have limited capacity to respond. And it also sets up that because of these specific vulnerabilities, in particular as it relates to climate change, SIDS are required to have the special assistance under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, including adaptation measures and mitigation efforts. So we have the Barbados Program of Action that really is the foundation of everything that follows in the context of the development of this notion of a special case for SIDS in the context of sustainable development. This program of action was carried forward by the Mauritius strategy for implementation of the Barbados Program of Action that was agreed in 2005 at the second SIDS conference. We then have the Samoa pathway, which was agreed in 2014, that really set up or attempted to set up a number of global partnerships for the further implementation of the Barbados Program of Action and the Mauritius strategy. And while those negotiations were happening on the Samoa pathway, in parallel, the international community was developing the Sustainable Development Goals that were agreed in 2014 and that were declared in the context of the UN Sustainable Development Summit in 2015 in the context of Agenda 2030 as set out in the document, The Future We Want. And so there's a lot of interlinkages between what is set out in the Samoa pathway in relation to SIDS sustainable development and what we see in the Sustainable Development Goals and in the broader Agenda 2030 that was agreed by the UN in 2015. So according to the UN, these are the goals here that are particularly relevant for small island developing states. Goal 2 on ending hunger, Goal 7 on energy, Goal 14 on oceans and seas, Goal 5 on gender, Goal 12 on sustainable consumption and production, Goal 15 on forests, Goal 6 on water, Goal 13 on climate change, and Goal 17 on means of implementation and partnerships. In the Future We Want document that was adopted in 2012 at the last Rio conference, Rio +20, it affirmed SIDS as a special case for sustainable development, noting their small size, remoteness, narrow resource and export base, and exposure to global environmental challenges and external economic shocks. And these include a large range of impacts from climate change and potentially a more frequent intense natural disasters. So there has always been this clear set of synergies, as I mentioned, between the sort of global sustainable development agenda, but the SIDS sustainable development agenda, which is specific to the particular needs and circumstances of SIDS, and which has been carried forward by all of the previous SIDS conferences and is now being taken forward in the context of the 4th International SIDS Conference. In terms of climate change and sustainable development, there has been a lot of progress made looking at some of the interlinkages and how climate change is going to impact and is already impacting countries' efforts to achieve the SDGs since they have been in place. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is known as a Rio Convention. It was adopted in 1992 alongside the Convention on Biodiversity and an agreement to adopt the Convention on Desertification. So it's one of 3 Rio Conventions. As a result, a number of the principles that are contained in Agenda 21 are also contained in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Some of these include the principle on common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, the rights to development, and the precautionary principle that sets out, even in the absence of scientific certainty, states are required to take positive action to address climate change and other environmental issues. We know that climate change is integrated into the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as Goal 13, taking urgent action. And we have in the latest synthesis report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the statement that climate change has reduced food security and affected water security, hindering efforts to meet sustainable development goals with high confidence. So the image that you see on the right of the screen is taken from the last synthesis report of the IPCC. And I know it looks a bit complicated, but there are 2 things that you should take from this. The first is that the goal to limit the increase in average global temperature to below 1.5 degrees Celsius that's set out in the Paris Agreement is highly consistent with attaining the Sustainable Development Goals. And the further we drift away from that goal, the less likely it will be that we can attain what is termed here as climate resilient development. So you'll see at the bottom of the graph, the IPCC says, prospects for climate resilient development will be further limited if global warming exceeds 1.5 degrees Celsius and if progress towards the SDGs is inadequate. So the graph sets out some of the conditions that need to be in place in order to move along a trajectory that is both able to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius as well as achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And it also sets out the conditions that will constrain these efforts. And so some highlights now from the Antigua Barbuda agenda for SIDS. It's entitled A Renewed Declaration for Resilient Prosperity. So the agenda does a few things. In the first instance, it integrates the outcomes from all of the previous SIDS conferences. We've noted in tracking implementation of some of the actions that were agreed in these SIDS conferences that in spite of the special case for environment and development that SIDS occupy within the international community, SIDS have been falling behind. And there are various reasons for this, a lot of them related to the fact that the support that was necessary from the international community for SIDS in their sustainable development efforts has not necessarily been delivered, at least not to the level that is required in order to ensure that SIDS can continue that upward trajectory in terms of their sustainable development aspirations. So for this reason, the current document also integrates the outcomes from the previous SIDS conferences and carries them forward. It also highlights some current concerns reflecting on the last 10 years of the implementation of the Samoa pathway from the last SIDS conference, stating that they have been critical for SIDS and that we are now in a new context where economic, social, environmental, as well as geopolitical threats to SIDS are so great that they can only be improved by a renewed enabling environment that gives meaningful effect to SIDS sustainable development. It also goes on to say that without the full support of the international community, SIDS will endure potentially far-reaching consequences. The outcome document aims to strengthen United Nations support for SIDS with clear requests for institutional strengthening for monitoring SIDS sustainable development efforts. So there's a real intention coming out of this document to ensure that the international architecture that is in place to monitor how SIDS are doing is improved and streamlined in the UN context. And it also establishes some new platforms for support. So a center of excellence will be established in Antigua and Barbuda with a data hub, an island investment forum, and an innovation mechanism. And this is part of the outcome document. It also promotes the establishment of citizen participation mechanisms and promotes the establishment of a dedicated SIDS debt sustainability support service. Debt was identified as one of the key constraints for SIDS in trying to achieve their sustainable development aspirations. So in terms of how the document itself is structured, it asks the question, what do SIDS want? And then it sets out solutions to achieve broadly objectives under the following headings: building resilient economies, fostering safe, healthy, and prosperous societies, a secure future, and environmental protection and planetary sustainability. If you want to have a look at the outcome document, there's a link here. We'll circulate this, but you could also Google it. It's online. It's important to note that the outcome document, although it has been agreed, is not yet enforced because it has to be adopted at the upcoming conference. There are a lot of different sectors that are addressed in the document under these 4 broad headings. Of course, climate change, but also areas such as health, food, agriculture, water, oceans, seas, peace and security, etc. So it is a document that addresses, like past outcome documents from SIDS conference, the full range of issues that impact small island developing states when we are speaking about sustainable development along the pillars of the social, the economic, as well as the environmental. So I'll stop there for now and hand back over to Bianca. Thank you all very much for your time and attention.
Rue, that was extremely valuable information. Thank you so much for that, especially the history of SIDS sustainable development in the UN. That was pretty fascinating. Definitely the special circumstances of SIDS is something that all journalists need to, just have in the back of the forefront of their minds when reporting. And that will be really useful to track progress on developments going forward. So thank you so much for that, Rue. Up next, we welcome Ms. Sharon Birch, Sustainable Development Section, United Nations Department of Global Communications. As a results-driven media relations specialist, Sharon has successfully managed media relations for several major UN conferences and UN reports. Sharon, I really appreciate you being here. I know how hectic your schedule is right now. You're in the thick of things. So she will take us through the priority outcomes for the UN at SIDS4, and she'll share her perspective from a global media lens. Thank you, Sharon. Over to you.
Welcome. Can you hear me?
Yep, all good.
Okay, great. So hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to brief here. With regard to the expectations for the SIDS4 conference, and I'm going to try and make this as simple as possible, and some of it will be repetitive based on what was said before. We're looking for this agenda, bold agenda that supports the SIDS in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Because one, the Sustainable Development Goals adopted since 2015 are really the blueprints, and we have heard this so many times, for just achieving a sustainable future for all developed countries as well as developing countries. The SIDS, the SDGs are also looked at as a compass in terms of, guidance, and whether it's from mobilizing climate action to promoting good health to fostering economic growth. We are also looking for greater voice and representation for SIDS. This year especially is really important because the narrative throughout the years in terms of how do we, the current systems that are in place, how do we change them, revamp them so that they respond to the needs of the most vulnerable countries. So this is huge for us in terms of allowing the small island developing states greater representation. And then there's a question of partnerships and investments. What we are looking for in terms of SIDS4 conference is greater partnerships, commitments, pledges, just, action taken to ensure that the small island developing states are well positioned to achieve the SDGs by the deadline of 2030. I also want to point out in terms of the UN, there is in the outcome document an area where it's about calling for more support from the UN system. The Secretary General is required to create a task force that will look at developing a monitoring framework, and then this would have to be submitted in the second quarter of 2025. So it's really crucial in terms of how do we monitor the progress that is made by small island developing states. Now, in terms of the SDGs, and I'm just going to give a little, just a sort of idea of where we are with the Sustainable Development Goals overall. Our Secretary General said this last year, and it still holds true, unfortunately, right now, is that, we are not in the best of situations. Right now, I think 100 and, with regard to 140 targets that can be evaluated, 50% of these are, showing moderate progress, 30% are actually showing regression. And then it's also known that the most vulnerable countries are the ones who are bearing the brunt of what is happening right now. So this just gives you an idea of what's happening with SDGs. They are under threat, and this of course has been because of climate crisis, conflicts, and then the lingering impacts of COVID-19. We have seen that this is the first time, and they're saying the first time in a generation where there has been a rise in extreme poverty, and it's expected 575 million people will be in extreme poverty by 2030. 84 million children will be out of school. And then, of course, in terms of climate action, it's not, we're not moving the dial there as well. In terms of SIDS, they face a unique set of challenges. One, of course, narrow export base, geographic location. So they are very vulnerable when it comes to shocks that have been taking place. We have to emphasize it can no longer be business as usual for small island developing states. Action needs to be taken now, or else there will be far-reaching consequences. Small island developing states have been battered by the economy, COVID-19 pandemic, and we have to remember that for small island developing states, we do rely on tourism. So this was terribly, impacted when COVID-19 pandemic took place. Small island developing states are facing a severe debt crisis. The number has been $82 million in debt that we have right now. And coming out of the recent report on World Economic Situation and Prospects report, which was launched last week, the Caribbean region actually is most indebted when it comes to, this crisis that we are facing. And then again, climate change is an existential threat. SIDS are at the front line of climate change, yet only contribute 1% to greenhouse gas emissions. There is some good news with regard to small island developing states in terms of, for example, the literacy rate of 90% higher than the global average. In terms of biodiversity, we have rich resources. And then in terms of technology, 67% of the SIDS population was online. And this, this shows that there is a demand for ICT services in these regions, but unfortunately, the infrastructure is still not there. Some not so good news. As I said before, total public debt for SIDS is approximately $82 billion. When it comes to losses, lost 153 billion from 1970 to 2020 due to weather-related, and water-related hazards. In terms of under 5 mortality rate, it still remains high when compared to middle income and high income countries. And then to note, because I feel, this is not highlighted well enough, the SIDS experience some of the highest rates of non-communicable diseases globally. So to come back to what is really important for us this year, one, the narrative throughout the year and really on the global agenda is about renewed multilateralism. So there's an upcoming Summit of the Future in September, 22nd to 23rd of September, which we're really calling for, global cooperation, a better reform of all the systems so that we can respond to the needs of not only the developed countries, but also the developing countries as well. There's this debt crisis, which is really impacting the most vulnerable countries. So financing for development will be a main track of the Summit of the Future. And then, of course, you may know about the SDG stimulus that the Secretary General has called for for the G20 to give $500 billion to help developing countries, the most vulnerable countries, achieve the SDGs. It's also a question of scaling up climate finance. Right now, out of the 100 billion that should be targeted to help the countries most in need, only 1.5 billion has been provided to the small island developing states. There's also the need to close the digital divide, as we know, in terms of, whether it's telemedicine, digital economy, all this is really important that we need to be in a position to respond to what is happening at present time. In terms of during the conference itself, I would say that everything is important. Everything needs to be a focus, but I would encourage you to look closely at the 5 interactive dialogues, especially when it comes to the one on revitalizing the economies, scaling up climate finance, as well as mobilizing critical aid for SIDS. The Secretary General is also doing a high-level meeting on mobilization of resources for the small island developing states. This takes place on the 28th of May and will be live streamed. There are special events which would focus a lot on the private sector contribution. And then I just wanted to also flag, and these programs will be featured on the media corner of the website. We will be having an SDG Media Zone, which is they're really informal conversations around, the themes of the conference. So please look out for those because this will be streamed live as well. And then we will be having press briefings across climates, across the revitalizing economies, harnessing technologies as well. So I think that is it from my side. Thank you.
Sharon, thank you so much. That was really, really valuable information. It's really sobering, as you said, SIDS are in a SOS and the Sustainable Development Goals are in peril. We're increasingly vulnerable, and that's where the media can play such a crucial role. We know achieving the SDGs is so imperative for us, and as you said, this should be the compass for us in order to amplify our stories and hopefully reach a global audience. So thank you so much for that information. Moving along, we have my good friend and a stalwart of regional media, Mr. Anderson Liburd. So Andy is the media focal point for SIDS4 in Antigua and Barbuda. He's in the thick of things right now, and he is an accomplished media professional hailing from Antigua and Barbuda with over 2 decades of extensive experience in senior editorial roles. He has lent his talents to the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS, and the promotion of the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, the MVI. So Andy will share his unique experiences as a leading Caribbean journalist, as well as the logistics of the do's and don'ts on the ground at SIDS4. The floor is yours, Andy. And are you hearing us? Okay, great.
Okay, I'm hearing you. Okay. Hearing me, Bianca? Hearing me, everyone?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity, and thanks all for being a part of it. It's always good to be in the company of fellow media workers and fellow journalists, and especially for this important and pivotal occasion here in Antigua and Barbuda, where we're hosting the fourth international conference on small island developing states. Appreciate the presentations before, because they pretty much laid out some of the things that I would have spoken to in relation to the opportunities to provide the best possible information to your audiences. And so we had a great deal of information by way of the countless issues that small island developing states need to pay attention to in relation to SIDS and in relation to making lives for our inhabitants, millions of inhabitants, better and more secure. So this pretty much I will drill down in terms of some of the details as it relates to the coverage that you would want to ensure that your audiences benefit from when coming to Antigua and Barbuda for the SIDS4 conference. And just to let you know that Antigua and Barbuda is a beautiful place like any of the nations of small island developing states. Beautiful beaches, warm and friendly people, and you will have an amazing time. So hopefully you can get to enjoy one of our 365 beaches if you do have the time for that. For those persons who are coming from further afield, just to let you know that in Antigua and Barbuda, we drive on the left. That's very important. And also we use the currency that we operate on is Eastern Caribbean currency, which is used throughout the OECS. It is pegged to the US dollar at a rate of $1 to US $2.70. Now you can please, if you wish, walk with the US currency, because at any shop, any store, any supermarket, anywhere, any business, they do accept the US currency. You may get back the change in EC. This is major because I know journalists, media workers, they usually walk with, of course, their equipment. And so you'd want to know that when you come to the conference venue, that you would have your tools fully charged. So the plug types that we use, type A, which is with the two flat parallel pins, and then there's plug type B, which is the plug which has two flat parallel pins and that round grounding pin. So please prepare yourself for that. Just getting here and getting around Antigua and Barbuda, at least in Antigua, we are served by major international carriers from the United States and Europe. And I think that you still can get some flights. You can still book some flights coming into Antigua for the conference. For regional journalists, for right now, the main airlines that I know of that are flying into Antigua and Barbuda for the conference would be Inter-Caribbean and the Caribbean Airlines. They fly within the region. Now, I must also share this with you. There are transportation arrangements for delegates coming into the conference. For every delegate that comes into the conference, there are transportation arrangements. So you will be picked up at the airport, and then you'll be taken to your accommodation. Now, for journalists, based upon my own personal experience, I know we move differently. We try to get here as early as possible, and I would like to encourage media workers, journalists, reporters, what have you, that if you're going to get to the venue, try to get here as early as possible. Now, this would probably put you outside of the window for pickup from accommodation, because delegates will get here a little bit later to attend the various proceedings that are taking place during the conference. But for journalists, you may want to do your live reporting, do your setup, make sure that your microphones are checked, cameras are working fine, and so on. They have to go through the security checks as well. So then you'd want to get here a little bit earlier. So I would encourage for, in those instances, that you make your own special arrangements. And the Transport Board, working in collaboration with some of the vehicle companies in Antigua and Barbuda, pretty much have quite a number of vehicles available to get persons who are attending the conference around Antigua and Barbuda to and from the conference venue, to and from the airport. Now, let's do this. And you would have heard all of the juicy bits of information that were laid out by Sharon and by Bianca in terms of the issues that will be paid attention to at the conference and some of the strong outcomes that all of SIDS are expecting from this very important conference. Now, this is definitely not a copy. And when I say not a copy, I'm talking about the previous one for those who would have been in attendance. And there was quite a bit of walking. The conference venue is the American University of Antigua. As a matter of fact, the American University of Antigua is located like 5 minutes away from the VC Bird International Airport, which is a lone airport in Antigua and Barbuda. So pretty much when I got here, I went straight to the AUA first of all. Now, all of the facilities, and I kid you not, are within walking distance of each other, despite the large number of people, but it is quite accommodating. And Sharon did hint at that. Media, I would want to tell you, should focus on the North Block. Focus on the North Block, because that's where you're going to find the press briefing room. That's where you're going to find the media center. That's where you're going to find the interview rooms. The side events, they are actually in 3 buildings just across from the media center. And it's just like, it's literally a 3-minute walk away. There is a courtyard, which is beautifully set up. So if you're doing television, what you're going to see, because in that area, in that same area, just in close proximity, in that same building that you're seeing, as a matter of fact, at the top floor there, and I don't think I'm giving away too much information here when I'm saying this, there's going to be VIPs, VVIPs. On the left-hand side where you see the Antigua flag, over to the left, that's where the media center is going to be. And within that building there is a courtyard, and as you can see, there is some excellent green space where you can do your reporting, do your television stand-ups, and what have you. So everything is pretty much in one place. Further to the left of, or to the north of that building is the main plenary hall, where the opening is going to take place, where all of the various meetings are going to be taking place. And so in this area, you will find quite a bit of persons moving back and forth. Some of the important leaders that are attending the conference, some of the high-profile personalities, heads of government, presidents, and what have you. Just by way of information, the speakers list was just released last night, as a matter of fact. I can tell you this much, that we have in excess of 100 countries being represented at the SIDS conference. And that doesn't include the various institutions, organizations, and agencies right across the UN system that will be in attendance. The numbers that we're looking at in terms of total numbers that are attending the conference is in excess, well in excess of 3,000. We expect last-minute registration. Speaking of registration, for regional journalists in particular, as soon as I hop off of this call, and I need to hop off like immediately, there is still opportunity for you to register. If you can send me an email, sids4.gov.ag. It can be found on our website. That's the website, sids4.gov.ag. You can find our email there. You probably, if you haven't registered as yet, and hopefully everyone who is attending this call would have been registered. I know there's some last-minute applications coming in, but the cutoff time is at midday. A few media houses are looking to expand their numbers based upon what they're seeing and what they're hearing coming from the conference, but the close-off time is at midday today. It should be a little bit easier for those persons coming, if you're within Antigua, and for those persons coming from outside of Antigua in terms of the region, it should be easier to get your accreditation because of how the system is set up for us. And we would want to make the information that has been shared available to especially those persons from within the region. Oh, let me just go back. In terms of Wi-Fi coverage on the campus, it is available everywhere. So from building to building that you go, you will have access to Wi-Fi. When you get to the conference facility, as I said, it's an easy walk. You just simply walk over to register. You come in at gate 5, and then you'll pass registration. If you have already been accredited, you go straight past there. There's a security checkpoint, and then right after the security checkpoint, you get to this building where the media center and the press briefing room and interview rooms are being set up. So those are the things that you should pay attention to in terms of the whole logistical setup and the conference venue layout. I want to bring your attention to some pre-conference events, because we're going to get into now in terms of the information that is available, how you can apply coverage of the events. Some of you may be getting in here Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So there's a Children and Youth Summit, there's a Gender and Equality Forum, and there's a Global Business Network. Now, in terms of the construct of the conference, it was done with a difference. And that is because Antigua and Barbuda saw the opportune time and the opportune occasion to bring all stakeholders together to be a part of the discussions and to be a part of the creation of solutions that will ensure that SIDS can be assured of a better and brighter future. And of course, the voice of the youth is important and is crucial. And so there's a Children and Youth Summit that is taking place on the weekend. There's a Gender and Equality Forum that is taking place off campus at the Nelson's Dockyard. And then there's a Global Business Network to ensure that the voice of the business sector and the private sector, the community enterprise, can be heard and play a part in the solutions that we need for all SIDS. Just getting down to the end, I know I've said quite a bit and quite a bit already been covered. Just in terms of the story ideas and some of the stories that you should be looking for. It's going to be a convergence of international leaders like probably what we have never seen before in the Caribbean for this conference. And that in itself is a story. I can't tell you at this point in time because that list, of course, is being held close to the chest for security purposes, but the list is quite influential. And that in itself is a story. There won't be any shortage of opportunity for you to reach out to political leaders, persons of influence, in terms of getting your sound on some of the most pressing issues of the day. One of the major stories for me, and Sharon did hint at it, it is this high-level meeting that is taking place on Tuesday. It is a closed-door meeting, and it was mandated by the United Nations. And this has to do with the mobilizing of resources for SIDS. It's, as I said, a high-level discussion, and it will be tackling the crucial funding challenges that all SIDS face. It is very difficult for us, especially when you talk about climate impacts, for us to readily make a comeback from some of these disasters. We saw what happened with COVID-19 and how difficult it was, and some countries are still struggling with those issues. And so when you try to get a loan to build back and to try to resuscitate your economy and help your people, and you have to do it at the commercial rates, it is extremely difficult. And Prime Minister Brown will be around, and so too are a number of leaders who are involved in the formation, development, and creation of the multidimensional vulnerability index, which was a helpful tool that will ensure that SIDS can get access to the necessary funds that they need, as opposed to getting funds based on the unfair rating of GDP, which makes your country look very good, and despite the struggles that you're going through. After that, for me, in terms of story that you should be keen to cover, how do we move from this after this conference? And I know worked and integrated into the outcome document, which is the ABAS, which is what it is called. How do we move from this conference now into actionable solutions to get us to the place that we're trying to reach. How small island developing states will compete for international support post-conference. And there are many issues. There are global conflicts, Sharon did indicate that, that are fighting for the attention of global leaders and those persons of influence throughout the world. And where do we slot ourselves? How do we compete in this new global framework? And so these discussions will be intense. It is an excellent opportunity for you to share with your audiences an understanding of what we're up against and how they can get involved and how things around them are impacting them in their daily lives as well. So quite a bit of stories to cover. I know I've covered quite a bit, and I think I'm going to end it right there. I'm going to end it right there. But pretty much everything is in place for what should a fruitful, productive, and successful meeting come May 27th to the 30th here in Antigua and Barbuda.
Brilliant, Andy. Thank you so much. And I know how passionate you are about amplifying Caribbean issues. And as you said, SIDS4, it really gives us a prime opportunity to do that. Thank you. So very quickly, I know that we are a bit short on time now. I'm pleased to introduce the lead of one of our partners, the lovely Miss Dizzanne Billy, Caribbean Regional Director from Climate Tracker. Dizzanne is an award-winning communications and digital marketing specialist and freelance journalist and writer. She is also currently both an island ambassador for island innovation and a mentor for Girls Care. Dizzanne, take it away.
Hello, hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. Hi everyone. I want to say thank you first of all for joining us today as we look forward to the SIDS conference that's happening in Antigua and Barbuda. To share a little bit first, I want to start off sharing a little bit about Climate Tracker. For those of you who do not know, I know we have a lot of media on board here, so it's a very important place to start. So we were founded in 2015. We are an international nonprofit organization, and we support, train, and incentivize young journalists to report on some of the most critical issues taking place. So that's what we do. Our work streams, so we work in Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America. Those are the regions where most of our projects are focused. And in the Caribbean, we have a team that is really growing in the past 3 years or so. These are some of the countries that we've worked in. We've worked with journalists, helping them to get opportunities to publish, attend conferences, then cover conferences, big conferences such as COP, and also to get training in climate justice reporting specifically is one of our areas of focus. So today, what I am going to do or try to do is talk a little bit about the unique challenges and opportunities faced by SIDS, and share a little bit about what the public should be aware of, right? Because as the media going there, we want to empower the public and to be able to understand climate action and advance sustainable development. All right, so I don't want to repeat too much of what Andy has said already. So instead, I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that you want to include in framing your stories as you prepare to cover the conference, because perhaps I think you want your stories to go beyond. Yes, you want to cover the conference, but you also want to sort of go beyond or include what is happening outside of the conference to give context and to strengthen your stories. Okay, so first and foremost, I want to talk a little bit about climate change and resilience. It's something that you want to include as you tell your stories, because as we know, climate change is not a distant threat. It is a present reality for small island developing states. We know that rising sea levels are threatening to submerge entire communities. We know that they're eroding coastlines and they're contaminating freshwater resources. These are things that we are aware of, but we want to include some of these points in our stories as we cover the conference as well, because some of your stories might be going not just regionally, but of course internationally as well, and we want that narrative to be out there. All right, so I think that at SIDS, one of the key issues will be developing and implementing comprehensive resilience strategies. And this could include investing in infrastructure that withstand extreme weather, creating early warning systems, promoting sustainable land management practices, and so on. So when we speak of climate change and resilience, we really want to think of how we can incorporate this into our storytelling coming out of the conference. All right, and as we know, as I mentioned, SIDS are particularly vulnerable to these impacts. So some story angles you might think of around sea level rise, whether it's sea level rise, extreme weather events, or these are these examples, some things that you want to include and incorporate. You want to talk about the human impact. Of course, you want to include scientific data. You want to include data and projections from climate scientists, Caribbean climate scientists, to illustrate the rate at which sea levels are rising, for instance. You want to have a local response. So you want to highlight local initiatives, such as mangrove planting projects, community relocations. You want to really showcase resilience and adaptation efforts that are happening in the Caribbean, but also what needs to happen in the Caribbean. You want to also look at rebuilding efforts. And I know that some of these points are I feel as though our next speaker might have some of these points to talk about and give you more context on as well. But these are things that you want to include in your stories, right? You want to give as much examples as possible to give people a clear idea of what is happening in the Caribbean, what is happening in small island developing states. All right. So something else to consider as well is looking at framing your stories around renewable energy and sustainable practices. This is going to be very important for us. Perhaps you're writing a story and you're looking at this angle. You want to look at, okay, are we transitioning? Yes. If we are, if the country is, how? If it's not, then why not? All right. So you want to have as much of a holistic a look at your stories as possible when it comes to renewable energy, because we know that this is a very pivotal issue. This is very pivotal is to transition to renewable energy sources, and many small island developing states are currently heavily reliant on imported fossil fuels, which are not only environmentally damaging, but also economically burdensome. Okay, so by shifting to renewable energy such as solar, wind, these nations or our nation can reduce our carbon footprints, of course, decrease energy costs, and increase energy security. So if you want to sort of incorporate these into your stories as you cover the conference, I think it's going to be very important to look at dependency. It's very important to look at the renewable energy solutions. What are the initiatives that are currently being championed? What are the benefits of these initiatives? And of course, always include personal narratives, all right? Include stories from people on the ground who have benefited from solar energy initiatives in some countries, but also explain how it has impacted their lives positively. That's going to be very, very important. Okay, so renewable energy, that's something to take into consideration for your storytelling. Like I said, spotlight successful initiatives and foster collaboration on renewable energy projects, right? So that's going to be very important. Another point to consider, and like I said, I want to kind of go up outside of what Andy has already mentioned, just to give some ideas and to get some ideas sparking. So biodiversity and ecosystem protection is going to be very important as well, because as we know, from the Caribbean, from small island developing states, we are very rich in biodiversity, and we have unique ecosystems that are home to very countless species not found anywhere else. So although these ecosystems are very important and very fragile, they are threatened by human activity, by climate change. And so protecting biodiversity and ecosystems is going to be very essential for us as we try to develop sustainably. So this is something to take into consideration as well as you start thinking about the stories that you want to tell. All right, so at the conference, discussions will include measures to protect marine and terrestrial biodiversity, such as establishing marine protected areas, enforcing sustainable fishing practices, etc. These are practical things that you want to include in your stories, because it's going to hit home for people and their livelihoods as you engage the public in what is going on at the conference, okay? So another point to take into consideration, and of course this one is very important, is sustainable economic development. So it really is a cornerstone of the SIDS agenda. It should be, it is, right? And many small island developing nations depend on tourism. We depend on agriculture. We depend on fisheries sectors, and that's these sectors are highly susceptible to climate change, right? So diversifying, of course, we know we speak about this all the time, diversifying economies and promoting sustainable practices within these industries is very crucial for long-term resilience and prosperity of small island developing states, right? So you want your stories to explore, as you cover the conference itself and all the high-level meetings, that's very important, but you also want your stories to explore innovative economic models that align with sustainable development goals, development goals, the SDGs, right? This could include support for ecotourism, sustainable agriculture, the blue economy initiatives, and all of those really good stuff. All right. So the public is important as media. We need to remember that the public support for these initiatives is very important. So we want to drive these things home so that our readers understand what these things are, how it impacts them, and why they need to support initiatives that that are surrounded by these sustainable development goals. All right. So another point, and I remember, I think it was Rueanna who mentioned this, and this one is very, very important, is looking around international cooperation and climate financing. So maybe you want your stories to focus on this, and this is very essential. This is a very essential component of addressing climate change, particularly for SIDS, because as we know as well, many SIDS lack resources and capacity to implement climate adaptation and mitigation measures on our own. So therefore, cooperation between nations and the provision of financial support is really, really critical for assisting SIDS in our efforts to build resistance, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and transition to low carbon economies. All right, this is very important. So if this is your area of focus, you want to look at things like multilateral climate funds. You want to look at things like bilateral aid and partnerships. You want to look at debt for nature swaps. Are there any stories around that coming out of the conference? You want to look at community-led initiatives, of course, but also innovative financing mechanisms, right? These are things that you want to look at if this is your area of focus coming out of the conference. And to wrap it all up, because I know I only have 10 minutes, so we're a little bit over time, but at the end of the day, as media, we want to empower our public, right? That's what I'm here to talk about, the public, what the public needs to know. These are some of the things that I believe the public needs to know, but at the end of the day, we want to empower action through awareness, all right? So to empower enhanced climate action and advance sustainable development, the public needs to be informed and engaged, and you as media, we as media, play a crucial role in this process. It's just a reminder, I know you are aware of this. And so by highlighting some of these stories of resilience, innovation, cooperation emerging from small island developing states, I really do believe that we can inspire a movement in the region, right, that is really focused on sustainable and equitable future. So I think what I want to do is urge you as media to keep the public informed, keep, apart from just mentioning what is happening and what is happening in the conference and what was said by the high level meetings and in the high level meetings and so on. That's very important. The side events, all of it is important. But at the end of the day, how are you going to take these outcomes from the conference and make the public understand why it's important and how it impacts us? All right, that is going to be key to your storytelling at the conference. And of course, stay in touch with our growing community of Caribbean climate journalists. You can find us on climatetrackercaribbean.org, and you can reach out to me. We have a team that's going to be on the ground as well if you want to meet up with anybody. So thank you so much. Back to you, Bianca.
That was excellent, Dizzanne. Thank you so much. And as you said, public empowerment, it looks like effective knowledge sharing as well as communication of our needs and international audience so that we can build regional resilience. So yes, moving quickly along, we have our last presenter. I'm pleased to welcome Ms. Hipolito, representing our partners at the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute. Nicole is the Executive Director of CANARI. She currently serves as an elected representative of the public to the Escazú Agreement on Access to Information, Public Participation and Justice in Environmental Matters in Latin America and the Caribbean. Nicole, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's lovely to be here with everyone this morning. So I really first will start off by introducing CANARI. For those who don't know, we're a technical nonprofit institute working across the Caribbean region for 35 years now. So we work on sustainable development, yes, climate change and disaster resilience, but also biodiversity and ecosystems, equity and justice, participatory governance. So we have a very broad remit. What I want to focus on today is the story that civil society will give you. And I would call that the real story about sustainable development. Civil society, of course, is the third sector. And remember that media is part of civil society, as well as academia, nonprofit organizations, community organizations, professional associations. So quite a diverse group doing a lot for sustainable development, delivering sustainable development, and holding governments accountable and others accountable for sustainable development. So what I want to focus on is this position paper on the screen. I did put the link in the chat, The Caribbean We Want. So as part of CANARI's preparations for SIDS4, we were very concerned that civil society was being marginalized. There were very few opportunities for civil society voice in terms of what are the sustainable development priorities and the new agenda for SIDS. So we worked with partners and mobilized and held dialogues in January and February and developed, I would call this quite a hard-hitting, frank and tough position paper on some of the issues. I think we'll give you some stories definitely to dig into. And over 120 civil society organizations participated in shaping this document, which is now out for endorsement. And we have over 80 civil society organizations from the Caribbean endorsed so far. So what I'm going to do is kind of go through the key messages in this paper, which I think will give you some stories. So the first message is about optimizing the contribution of civil society through strong, mutually beneficial partnerships. So unfortunately, even though civil society is delivering sustainable development, this is not recognized and appreciated, and much more can be done to better enable this role for a whole of society approach to address sustainable development in SIDS. So as an example here, here's some research we did a couple of years ago, just showing how much work civil society in the Caribbean is doing to address climate change, for example. 314 initiatives over the 2016 to 2020 period. And this works out to a value of just under $35 million. So civil society is playing all these roles, delivering climate justice, doing climate research, supporting communities to take local climate action. And so they need more support. And there is a whole story on this. The ABAS, the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, is very token on the role of civil society in sustainable development. So I think this is something you could dig into most certainly. The second message is really on this big topic for SIDS4 and the new agenda on economic development. And really it's arguing that economic development is not about big business, is not about the rich getting richer and the gap continuing to widen. And poverty is such a problem in many SIDS. So it's about a message of promoting and supporting local, environmental, and social enterprises. So these are those enterprises that have environmental and social objectives as part of their mission. They are hybrid between profit and non-profit. And certainly in the Caribbean, this very special group of businesses is not recognized. There's no enabling legislation or policy or regulations to support their work. And they need particular types of business support, particular types of financing tailored to their needs so that they can be effective. One subgroup that CANARI is particularly interested in, and we've done a lot of work with these very small community micro enterprises, which are things like community ecotourism, basket making, small scale fishing, chocolate making, all these wonderful industries operating at the community micro level. And they are very much in need of support. And they're also very much vulnerable to climate change and all the other stresses. So this is an interesting story. I put a link to our platform, which is online, which has much more information. The third big message from Caribbean civil society in the position paper is on justice. And it's on the need to incorporate environmental, social, climate, and gender justice at all levels of governance. So you'll hear SIDS governments framing the climate change issue as a justice issue, where SIDS are not responsible for greenhouse gases, we are not responsible for climate change, but of course we are among the most vulnerable regions in the world facing the brunt of it and really can't do anything. We are not causing the problem, so we need to adapt and so on, and we need others to mitigate and give us finance. But there's another level of the story in terms of climate justice at the local level within SIDS, where there are vulnerable and marginalized groups who face intersectional justice issues. So they are already marginalized because they are poor. They are already marginalized because of their gender or their race. So this climate impacts are another layer of injustice to these people. And I would encourage you, Climate Analytics and Climate Tracker, part of a Caribbean Climate Justice Alliance, along with Canary. And that alliance of civil society organizations developed a wonderful Caribbean Climate Justice and Resilience agenda, which really explains these issues and lays out what the priorities are for the Caribbean. In particular, the position paper is calling for a few things, which I'll just highlight there. Well, surprisingly, the Caribbean, unlike most of the world, does not have the right to a safe, healthy, sustainable environment, which was passed a couple of years ago at the UN level. It was recognized. It's not part of our national constitutions. And a lot of our national laws and policies are quite weak in terms of supporting this area. That's another interesting story you could pick up on, as well as which countries are party to a regional agreement called the Escazú Agreement, which is about access rights to access information, participate in decision-making, and access justice. So there are a lot of stories on justice within SIDS. The final message is from Caribbean civil society is to pursue only development and disaster mitigation options that are in harmony with nature and aligned to social development objectives. It sounds very obvious, but it's certainly not happening. As you know, there's a lot of physical development and other development initiatives that can threaten environmental sustainability, that can increase climate vulnerability rather than increase resilience, and that cannot deliver economic development at the local level, poverty reduction, equity, and justice. So some of the things here that civil society, for example, is doing, I highlighted this platform here, things like nature-based solutions, incorporating nature-based solutions into development. And certainly civil society is doing a lot here with mangrove planting, forest protection, and so on. And also looking at locally driven adaptation and development planning. There's some very nice stories there of community-led sustainable development initiatives and localizing development and climate finance. So the climate finance story is a lot about SIDS asking for the international community to fulfill their commitments and their pledges. But also we need to ensure some of that finance is channeled down to the ground, to the local level, to address vulnerabilities of communities, of people on the ground. So those are my 5 stories, and I had put, let me just scroll back up, please. I had put some emails on our website there. Please feel free to contact Canary if we can hook you up with Caribbean civil society who'll be at SIDS4, and you can get some stories from them. Thank you.
Excellent, Nicole. Thank you so much for those insights and for hammering home the invaluable role that civil society plays in fostering a more fair and sustainable future for all, and how media can amplify this important work. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of our presentations. Thank you so much to all our speakers for that wealth of information. And audience, now is your time to shine. Hipolito, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much again. Thank you for the excellent speakers, Rueanna, Sharon, Anderson, Dizzanne, and Nicole. Excellent information shared to our journalists and our participants here today. So, okay, so there's the Q&A session. Do you have any questions? You can either put it in the chat or you can raise your hand. We'd ask you to turn on the camera and to say your name and where you're from, and you can go ahead and direct a question to anyone at the panel. So who wants to go first? Is the time to know more about their presentation and what they can share with us. Okay, so while we wait for the first participants to ask their question, I have a question for Rueanna. In terms of the draft document, what advice would you give to journalists to cover that document? Because I know a lot of it can be technical, but we want it to be relatable. We want it for the regular person in the street to understand the importance of this document and what it's supposed to achieve.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question, Hipolito. The document itself is not too long. It's about 27 pages. I would suggest from a journalist point of view, maybe start at the back first. As I indicated in my presentation, the document is sort of split into two sections. The first section is kind of, well, three actually. There's sort of a background section, then there's the first question on what do SIDS want? And then there's the answer to that question, how do we achieve this? And I think from a journalist perspective, it's interesting to look at both questions, but probably most useful to look at what has been agreed in terms of some of these solutions and to interrogate whether those are really effective, whether they go far enough, whether they are strong enough, whether they really address the issues that we all know exist in the context of different SIDS. So yeah, if you want a cheat sheet, I would say start from the back, but generally the entire document is quite an interesting read, I would say.
Thank you so much, Rueanna. For Nicole, you were talking about the sustainable development and especially with civil society. I know that in several Caribbean countries, well, for Belize, let me speak for Belize, there has been the debate whether there can be a balance with sustainable development and economic development, infrastructure development, and especially where there are mangroves and the coastline is concerned. Do you believe that there can be a balance where we can achieve sustainable development and politicians, businessmen can achieve what they want, economic development, have the businessman, revenue?
I do believe that. I mean, I think it's extremely challenging. It's not simple, it's not easy, and trade-offs will need to be made. You can't have everything. We have small islands and limited space, so you're going to need to make choices about what to do where. But I think in order to ensure people, planet, prosperity, the three buzzwords of the Sustainable Development Goals, what's important is how those decisions are made. Those decisions need to be informed by scientific knowledge. They need to feed in local knowledge, and all stakeholders need to be involved. It needs to be not secret decisions made by a few powerful people in closed doors. It needs to be open, transparent. Certainly the public and stakeholders who are most affected need to be able to have a voice. So to me, that's the key. It's not easy, but to negotiate those trade-offs and make those decisions as a community or as a region or as a country, people need to be part of the process. And that's where civil society can play a very important role in representing those voices. Thanks for the question.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Now for Andy, you mentioned where we know that SIDS4 is a couple of days away, and the crucial part for media houses, seeing that over 100 countries are being represented now, regional media houses want in that action. So for the list of accredited media houses and journalists, would that be made public?
The list of what?
The accredited media houses or journalists attended SIDS to cover it.
Yeah, it can be made available. It can be made available, but I don't think it will be widely published, in other words. And I can share that there's quite a number of reputable institutions that are making their presence felt at SIDS4. The BBC, there's strong interest from CNN across the region as well. I don't know if Laurie is on this call, and sorry to be shouting up her name, but hopefully we can cement a collaborative effort between us and the Caribbean Media Corporation as well, whose presence, of course, is going to be very important. We also have a strong presence through an initiative that was mounted by UN for some Caribbean fellows in terms of journalists to be a part of, from all of the regions of small island developing states to be a part of the conference. So in terms of coverage, I think we are very, 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 very good. It's just for us to ensure that we place front and center the issues that are really impacting us so that we can maximize on the presence of the international media houses that will be in Antigua for the conference.
Thank you so much, Andy. Okay, we have a question from Alberta Joseph Alexander. She's asking if the speakers can comment on covering the side events. Andy would like to take that one.
Could you repeat that again for me, please? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. We have a question from Alberta Joseph Alexander. She's asking if you can speak on covering side events.
Okay, well, it's in excess of 100 side events. All of them are not on the conference facility, on the conference site. Some of them are off the conference site. Some of them are actually virtual as well. And the side events, most of them, if not all, are pretty open. And so once you're a delegate, it is there for you to go and attend. And the side events room on conference, all of them are located in close proximity to each other, so that you can just move from one event to the next. There is a schedule, and that is available on the UN website as well. So just look for UN and just put in side events, and the full schedule is there. And there's no shortage of information as it relates to the conference. So whatever you're looking for, whatever you're seeking, the information is readily available, except for those areas with their security concerns.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Again, this is the Q&A session. So if the participants have any questions, you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question to one of the panelists. If not, we can move to the close. Go ahead, Dr. Jackie.
Quick question to Andy and some of the other panelists. For those media persons who would like to have access to some of the experts, to heads of government and presidents and so on, I am looking for interviews, for content. How do is there a special protocol to approach, say I wanted to interview Mia Motley or, the Prime Minister of Trinidad? Is there a special protocol, Andy, that you are putting in place for us to make those interviews available? And do you have interview rooms where we can do those on site? Did you hear me, Andy? Sorry. Were you able to hear me just now?
I would suggest, yes, I did, and I think exactly I know what you're asking about. For a lot of persons, yes. Yeah, for listeners who are covering media houses who are covering the conference, experts are pretty much readily available, moving in and about the conference facilities and rooms, and purchase made. For heads of government, you mostly would have to go through the various, especially at highest levels, and that was the best. They would be their media people, political and what have you, and requests to them. And I think agency is a person of influence. I think you can simply, and as a matter of fact, I certainly mind based upon some information I've ever received, is that it's not only that the media will be hounding some people. Some persons are here, and they will be the ones that will be hounding the media for opportunities to get the word out on their special interests as well. So it's going to be working both ways.
Thank you so much, Andres. We have a question from Ryan Bachu from Garden Media in Trinidad and Tobago. And his question to any of the panelists who would want to answer is, how does this event pave the path for COP later this year? Can SIDS4 influence developments for COP? Would you want to answer, Rueanna?
Sure. Thank you, Hipolito. I'll take a stab at this one. Well, we understand, I set out in my presentation the ways in which the Sustainable Development Agenda has been intertwined over the years with the climate change discussion, predating the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and setting up some of the key principles that we are still applying now in the context of climate change discussions. One of the issues that we're going to be addressing this year at COP relates specifically to climate finance, setting a new collective quantified goal on climate finance that will replace the 100 billion goal that was agreed since 2009, 2010. And as you can imagine, it is an extremely contentious discussion where issues pertaining to who is the correct contributor base, who are the correct recipients for this climate finance will come up. In that context, a number of difficult discussions are happening on, whether all of the countries that are currently entitled to climate finance that were considered developing countries in 1992, whether they all still belong to that category. What is the degree of priority that should be given to certain countries to receive climate finance? Who should really be first in line? And the SIDS outcome document, what it does helpfully is to reaffirm the special and particular circumstances and particular vulnerability of SIDS, because you might imagine that that also is coming into question in the context of these discussions on climate finance and who is entitled to receive and who should be on the hook to have an obligation to provide. There have been proposals, for example, for small island states or members of EUSIS, such as Singapore, to be, classed as a contributor for climate finance. Right now, they're still classed as a SIDS. So these issues are very much being debated. And I think part of the value of this SIDS conference is really to speak to the particular circumstances of small island developing states, to make the case for why previous commitments that weren't met in relation to the provision of finance to SIDS need to be met urgently, and also to establish the continued need for a priority focus and attention on SIDS when it comes to climate finance. The document also sets out issues in relation to how the multilateral development system needs to change and evolve in order to be able to respond to the needs of SIDS. And this also pertains to, the ability of SIDS to access climate finance, which is going to be another issue that is discussed this year at the COP. So there are some very clear interlinkages that, really set up a bit of a highway from this conference straight into the COP, especially as it relates to the particular needs of SIDS. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And we're coming to the closing of this session. So my last question, and I hope Andy would answer. If I were to go there to the location, to Antigua, what would be the best beach I should visit? You know, this is one of the questions I've been having this entire time. I'm not sure if Andy heard me, but I think I'll go visit all of them then. Okay, so I guess I'll have to find out myself, right? So, so we'll go to the closing and we'll turn it back to you, Bianca. Thank you so much again for the speakers.
Hello, sorry guys, I think that my internet fell out a bit there, but thank you so much, Hipolito, and I will join you at the beach. I can't wait. So everyone, thank you. Thanks for joining us. I mean, we know climate change and sustainable development for SIDS. It's such a significant media issue globally. And I mean, just today we saw international reports on the small islands winning a key case in the UN courts. Antigua and Barbuda was actually one of the islands that brought that case forward. So congratulations, Andy, to your countrymen. It's absolutely imperative that our journalists act as a voice of the vulnerable and be a vehicle for sustainable achievements. I hope that you found this session informative and empowering. Thank you all again for joining us, and we wish you a great day and a very productive SIDS4. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.